Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
This is Adam.
And today we're going to give our hot take review on the game we just finished playing, Hegemony, Lead Your Class to Victory. But before we jump into the discussion on that game, we're going to talk about some poll results that I posted on social media this week. Speaking of social media, do you guys know where you can find us on social media?
I don't know, Tim. Why don't you tell me?
We got a Facebook group, we're on Blue Sky, we're on Threads, we're on Spoutable, and we're still on the platform formerly known as Twitter, but just barely. So if you're looking to interact with us or follow our new episode releases, or even join in on some of these conversations and polls, those are some of the places you can find us. Right now, many of those platforms do not have polling options. So Facebook group is the main place where you're going to find our polls if you want to be involved with it. But here's the question that I asked this week. I said, do you pay attention to all of the new board game releases that were announced or limited released at a big convention like GenCon? GenCon, if you weren't aware, was the biggest convention in the United States, and it just happened about a week ago. So a lot of people have been talking about the hot new releases that happened there. Here are the options that I gave on the poll. And I'll also tell you how people responded. Yes, all or most of them was 28%. I looked closely at a few, was 47%. It barely registers for me was 21%, or not at all was 4%. How would you guys answer this poll?
Well, I'm somewhere between I don't really pay attention to it and I look at a few because, well, for one thing, I hear about all the new stuff from you guys because you guys are really dialed in. And so I get all the news I need right from you two. The other is I'm pretty uniquely bad at actually identifying games that I'm going to like until I play them. So I don't feel like it really helps me that much. It's fun to look at them and say, oh yeah, that game looks like it has a neat theme, or that one's got a cool production, of the stuff that's very obvious that you can see from a quick look at something. But I just don't find it that helpful to do. And then when I start playing them, that's when I start getting excited about a particular game, when we do a review on it, that sort of thing.
I put it barely registers with me or not at all. I think barely registers is a little more accurate. I don't even know what the conventions are. I just hear about them. Oh, GenCon, and then Essenspiel, and Dice Tower West and Dice Tower East and South, and Take a Cruise to Alaska. I hear about them, and I don't necessarily know when they are, or have any interest in going, or I don't know which games are associated with which convention. I guess that's a thing too. So I usually hear about games, I feel like in the 5, 6, 7 months after they release, maybe a few ahead of time. And I'm like, oh, I'm excited about this one. But a lot of them, I'm 5, 6 months behind the game and I hear about a game through the grapevine and it stands out, a couple good reviews. And then that sparks my interest. I don't know if I'm self-reflecting correctly. So what did you think, Tim?
Well, it sounds to me like if you're here for board game news, listeners, this is the wrong place to be. You probably should find that elsewhere. No, I actually said it barely registers for me because, to be honest, I'm not at these conventions, and there's a lot of chatter about what people are excited about. Like a lot of my favorite podcasts coming up to these conventions and shortly after them, I kind of ignore them for a few weeks because there's a bunch of what's the Gen Con hotness, or what am I excited about? And I don't care about a bunch of games that haven't been released and nobody's played yet and they haven't been tested. If they're showing up on the hotness because people are talking about them but nobody's played them, I'm just not that excited about it. What I will do, though, is coming out of these conventions, there might be a few titles that start to show up on the hotness and they're there consistently for a little while. Then, and if it looks interesting, right? It's a cool box cover. It's showing up on BGG Hotness. I'll click into it. I'll pay attention to it. We've had a couple listeners say, hey, did you see this come out of Gen Con? Check it out. So it's given me a couple things to pay attention to. But generally, I pretty much ignore all this stuff until it's available in retail and people can start to buy it. And, we have an opportunity to play it and things like that. So, yeah, I kind of do the same thing. Now, the reality is none of us go to these big conventions yet. I'm going to be going to my first big US convention, BGG Con, in November. So I might be paying a little bit more attention to stuff that is going to be just, previewable there. But that's not a big enough convention for publishers to really hold off releases till then. So I think Gen Con's pretty unique in the United States, or Essen out in Germany is pretty unique because that's where publishers are really presenting to the public for the first time some of the big games. So it's exciting. It's exciting that new games are coming out, but I'm just not paying attention to them until they're actually available for the general public to start to buy, or I could buy them, or we could play them. And that's kind of how I think about it. I had a few games that some listeners had either played or had seen come out of GenCon this week, and they're like, "Hey, Board Game Hot Takes, you guys got to check this out. I can't wait to see this reviewed." And I clicked into it, and if it was like generic title, uninteresting, wasn't designers I knew, that still doesn't get me excited just because people are talking about it. But like the one game that had a lot of chatter was Nucleum, which is by some of our favorite Italian designers and kind of an interesting premise. And people are saying, hey, it's like Barrage and Brass, which are games that we like. Okay, well, that one's got my attention. But there are plenty of other games that have been on the hotness that came out of there that so far, nope, don't really have any interest. I'll see if it starts to strike my fancy a little bit down the road. Here's how some of our listeners responded. So Christopher Prime said, I let my board game socials tell me what to look at, but I will pay close attention if I'm going to the convention. So yeah, I think that's more accurate for me too, right? I'm not like out there scrounging to see what is going to be at the con. Not that's a problem. That's great if that's exciting to you. But I will kind of pay attention to what people are actually playing, pictures that come up on social medias from the con that look exciting. Seth Gonzalez said, it has to have a catchy title and some good artwork to make me take notice at first glance. Then if it has the right stuff, theme and mechanics, I'll look further at it on YouTube and Board Game Geek. I'm not looking at the cute, family-friendly, or lightweight stuff. So that means a lot of games at these cons get me to swipe left. And Ray Meyer says, I'll wait to see what they're talking about next year that released this year. So
smart.
Pretty aligned with Chris on that one. So anyway, yeah, if you guys want to interact with our polls in the future and get your votes in, but also leave some comments that we can read and pay attention to, find us on any of the socials I mentioned at the top of this episode. That's a lot of social media to keep track of. I'm going to wait to see where things fall over the next coming months. Maybe it'll be down to a couple. But right now, I'm going to try to actively post on all of those and excited to build little communities wherever you all are hanging out, playing games and talking with us. Well, let's jump into Hegemony, Lead Your Class to Victory. And I'm going to show you why I was the best class of all time. Let's get into a description of Hegemony, Lead Your Class to Victory.
Hegemony, Lead Your Class to Victory is a game which simulates the push-pull, integrated dynamics, economic entanglement, and macro principles between four classes of society. In a four-player game, each player represents one of the following. First up, the state, or government, who, using cards or a set of prescribed basic actions, attempts to set social policies, handle potentially tumultuous events, and gain legitimacy with each of the other three classes. Second, the capitalist class, which roughly represents the interests of large businesses and seeks to make profits by producing goods and services. They set up and manage companies with workers from both middle and working classes. Speaking of the middle class, as the operator of this faction, you'll be attempting to set up your own smaller companies, keep your workers employed, increase prosperity, and of course, pay taxes. Finally, the working class, which plays similarly to the middle class, will need to cover their needs like health and education and food, all while increasing their own prosperity and paying their own easy-to-compute taxes. As a side note, the rulebook for this game is 40 pages long, and in addition to each class having their own set of mostly unique actions and cards, there are additional rules, like the intervention of the International Monetary Fund, the voting phase of each round, loans, preparation phases, production phases. So I'll give a broad strokes overview, an example of an action, and the branching ramifications that actions have, just to give you a gist of the flow of the game. The game is played over 5 rounds with 5 phases each round, with the bulk of the game spent in the second phase, where players take turns playing one of 5 cards from a hand of 7. The resulting board state determines what happens in the production phase, which is followed by the elections phase, which players have been posturing for during that action phase, which leads into the scoring phase, then on to the preparation phase of the next round. So that's the general flow. So going back to that action phase, you have a hand of 7 cards, and you're only going to play 5 of them, one at a time, so it goes around the table, playing 1 card at a time. And as an example of the action, the working class might play a card called Health Subsidies, which allows them to buy health credits from the state at half price, which the working class pays to the treasury. Then they can use one of their free actions to turn those health credits in, gain prosperity, which are points, and produce a new unskilled worker to add to the worker pool, which is now available to seek employment from any of the other classes. This increases the working class's population, which means it will cost more to meet the needs of the working class by feeding and paying taxes during a later phase. It gives them more sway when it comes time to the voting phase. This type of action and branching effects on all other classes and aspects of the game is typical for most actions from every class on every turn. So if that sounds appealing to you, or even if that sounds like a disaster, stay tuned because we have some varying opinions about this game. At the end of 5 rounds, a class with the most points wins the game. Hegemony Lead Your Class to Victory was designed by Vangelis Bagirtakis and Varnavas Timiatou, with art by Jakub Skop. It was published by Hegemonic Project Games in 2023.
All right, welcome back. So we're going to talk about the gameplay and mechanisms of Hegemony Lead Your Class to Victory. This is a true hot take. We're going to be talking about this game after a single play of it, but this is a unique first play of the game because it literally took us 3 sessions to get through the game. It was a pretty heavy, pretty long game, and we tend to have about 2 to 3 hours to play a game at night. So we played over 3 different weeks to get through this episode. We finished the last 2 rounds of the game tonight. But gameplay and mechanisms, I'm going to start here, and the thing I want to call out the most is the voting phase of this game. I found this to be a very fun part of the game where every class has different motivations to kind of affect what the different policies are, and people could take actions, very important actions in the game, meaning like you're giving up one of the 5 things you can do in a round to basically put a bill to vote. And so it was important to do. And then you get this voting phase, this bag pulling phase, this exciting push your luck phase where everybody's pulling things out of bag. You get to see what's happening. And then after those happen, then you can also, behind a hidden screen, commit more to it. You can do that little scythe combat phase where you can put a little bit more influence there or bluff the other people and say, they know I've got more influence than them, so hopefully they don't put anything. I'll hold back. I love this phase because it was so impactful. Every class had different motivations at different times to kind of push for it. So yeah, that was the first mechanism that I think really stood out here. I don't know. I probably jumped way too into detail on something that needs some big, broader conversation, but I just had to call out that voting phase as my favorite mechanism here.
I'm glad you called that out because I actually really like that too. That was the thing I was going to mention first if you didn't. So for one, it's huge because it changes kind of like the whole game state. You know, you're always, because for one of the things you have to do, you have to pay taxes at the end of every round. And this is going to affect your taxes. It's going to affect your ability to bring in workers to do the jobs. It's going to affect your ability to buy stuff. I mean, one of the things that happened in our game was we had nearly free education provided by the government through almost the entire game. So people were running to get that free education, which means we were running out and nobody was buying Steve's expensive education. Steve was the capitalist. So that was really interesting. And then on top of all that, probably the thing that we didn't pay enough attention to because we didn't have the experience and the understanding to was just how much that was going to affect endgame scoring. Because for each of the classes, they have kind of a desired state of the political landscape. So, for example, if you're the capitalist, you really want lower taxes, you want small government, you want more immigration, things like that. But if you're the working class, you want to have you'd rather have higher taxes, but also get free education and free healthcare and things like that. And so, at the end of the game, one of the big scoring effects is that each player gets a pretty significant amount of points based on where those different markers are on those political tracks. So for me, I was the middle. I wanted all those right in the middle there between the very liberal and the very conservative. So, and then Adam was the working class. Adam wanted things that were more along the more progressive side of things. So huge points came out of that, or huge points could potentially come out of that. So not only were you trying to affect the game as you were playing it, but you were trying to set yourself up so that all those politics were in the right spot to get you a lot of end game points as well.
Yeah, just to try and focus this in a little bit, we're talking about so much stuff because there's so much stuff in this game. I'm going to back up a second and say how all of these mechanisms and things we're talking about, this game captures such a scope that there's so many different things we're going to be discussing, and it's going to sound disjointed, but all of these things flow together so nicely. So listener, maybe you'll have to piecemeal this one together by the end of the complete conversation that we have because there's so much going on. It's going to be a little asynchronous as we talk about this. Tim, you talked about the voting phase. That was so neat because that was the specific puzzle for you. You had this card every round that pops up, and if you could match which section each of that vote would be with your little card, you get some points for that. How cool was that? That's a whole different puzzle that none of the other players had. I thought that was a cool little mechanism. Chris, you talked about the taxes. I was the working class. I had easy to compute taxes. Chris, I think you had 3 or 4 sheets you had to bounce around to compute your taxes, as the middle class might actually have to do with a small business owner. And then Steve, as the capitalist class, of course, he has a whole different set of tax rules too, and he's paying those over to the state. So just that tax mechanism alone is such a great mechanism and tied in to the entire rest of the game so seamlessly that it's easy to bounce around with all the mechanisms.
I really appreciate your enthusiasm for tax calculation, Adam. That's something.
I've never been so excited about taxes in a game in my entire life. It's crazy, right? But they did it amazing.
I think, and I'm not going to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but I think the key is right that the game is so thematic in trying to represent how different classes in a economic society operate that tax calculation was an important part. And it was important for not only the people that had to pay the taxes, which was all three of the working, the middle class, and the capitalist class, but it was also important for the state, which is what I played tonight, because that's the only way I got money, or that's not the only way, but it was the main way that I got money. And I needed that to let me sustain paying all your guys nonsense over the next round of the game. But I did think it was funny, Chris, that Adam's talking about how that was so fun. And then Chris, every round, he's like, this is like the worst work I've ever had to do in my life. So I think I should have started the whole conversation here with the fact that this is an asymmetric game, right? And last week we talked about asymmetric player powers versus asymmetric games. And this is a drastically asymmetric game. Each of us are playing very different rule sets. We have different scoring conditions. We have different upkeep conditions. We have different cards we can play. We have different motivations for what we're doing. Like everything we're doing more than any other game I've ever played is different. But I do want to say, though, that even with all of that, I think the game is relatively streamlined. I think I'm going to get some disagreement here, but I found the game to be pretty understandable and consistent within a very complex set of rules that had to follow. What do you guys think about that? Do you think that streamlined is a term I can accurately apply to this game?
No. No, this is not a streamlined game. There is no question about that.
There is a question about it. I just raised the question, Chris. There is a question.
But there's no real question. I think you raised it for rhetorical purposes.
No. Oh my gosh, I have a retort to this.
There is a rhetorical question.
No, I have a retort.
No, but I mean,
Oh, Chris, you're going down.
So multiple steps in calculating your taxes. Let's talk about the 15 minutes we spent figuring out what happens when the IMF came in because you failed so dramatically as the governor of this country, Tim. And I'm saying that half jokingly, but yeah, I mean, we actually had to dig out the rule book and go through this long exercise of so IMF comes in, Tim has to collect the taxes, then he has to take loans, then he has to sell businesses, the government-owned organizations. It
wasn't that long, Chris. It was like 3 minutes.
It was a lot longer than that.
That whole huge process.
I timed it. It was exactly 15 minutes and 37 seconds. No, actually, I didn't really time it, but it felt like forever. So I'm not dogging it completely as being. There was a flow to it. I will say that. There was definitely a flow to the game, and I think it took us a while to get into it, partially because it was done over the course of a couple different sessions. So there was a flow, and I think the flow was relatively understandable. And then there was the occasional time when you had to go kind of down the rabbit hole of something like the IMF, or for me, it was the tax thing and remembering what I had to do for taxes. So I definitely think there was a flow. I don't think you can call it streamlined, but I think Adam is going to put me in my place here in just a second. So Adam, do it. Tell me why I'm wrong.
Chris, you delayed your answer. You elongated your answer to try to decrease my emotion, my passion in this answer. It's not going to happen. I'm not going to let you do it. I'm fired up. I think in a sense, Tim is absolutely correct that this game is streamlined for the amount that it encompasses, for the scope that this game grabs and weaves together in such an amazing way. It is absolutely one of the best made games from transitioning that abstraction into thematic coherence and cohesion. And it is absolutely streamlined for what it does.
Thank you, Adam. I agree. Okay, so we're not going to touch on all the mechanisms here, but I want to just give you the scope of what this game has going on, right? We talked briefly about the voting phase of the game, and that's because on the main board of the game, there is a section that talks about policy, and it's all kinds of policies. It's fiscal policy and immigration policy and foreign trade policy. And there's basically a marker that kind of shows where that policy sits, where the laws sit in the current state. Beyond that, underneath that, there is the whole foreign trade row, which changes every round. It tells you how much you can sell goods to the foreign market. Below that is all the capitalist classes, buildings, all these different buildings they can build, as well as how many workers can work in them, how much they produce when the workers produce, how much they have to pay the workers. All these things are represented. Below that, the middle class workers, how many buildings that businesses they run, how many workers are in them, how many of the working class that did they hire in their businesses, and how much they're going to be paying those working class businesses. Over to the right of the board here, we've got the tax level for this round. But below that, we've got events that are happening every round that the state has to deal with. And if they don't, they get negative points. And that usually means providing some goods or services to take care of an event that happens in that round. Below that, we've got the state's market, where people can purchase goods from the state at a discounted rate. And then you've got the state-run businesses that can also employ workers. This is just on the main board. All of us have individual player boards that do different things. So I think that starts to give you an idea of the scope of all the different mechanisms that are going on here and all the different things that are going on in this board. And with all of that being said, this game is streamlined when you consider all of that stuff happening and how fairly simple this rule book is to get through and process and reference, even though we had to spend a decent amount of time referencing it to look up some rules or walk through a phase of a game or whatever. I think that you can call it streamlined for everything it's trying to accomplish from a thematic perspective and from a representational perspective of everything that's going on in this game.
Let me just say, I got to push back on that because, I mean, you're saying the modifier of for everything this game is trying to do. That's kind of like saying for a cake that you burned really bad, this actually tastes pretty good. And I also want to draw a distinction here because there is a difference between creating a game that is incredibly complex and yet playable. Like I will say this game is an absolute triumph of creating an economic model that is an actual playable game. And that some people obviously like. I mean, you guys, I can tell, had a good time playing this game. That is amazing what they accomplished with that. The theme and the realism. And I don't want to kind of get into all the details of the theme yet. But I don't think that in any way you can say, but that makes it streamlined. It was definitely playable. And that seems to me like an incredibly difficult thing to do in this situation. They pulled that off. But I could never call this game streamlined.
Okay, so I will concede maybe streamlined is the wrong word. Maybe efficient for what it's trying to convey might be a better way to say it.
I buy that.
I can agree to that, sure. But the point remains, for what it does, it's doing some amazing things.
Let's just talk about the basic action of this game. And mostly what you're doing on your turn is you are going to take an action. And the action is going to be one of like several basic actions that your class can do. And they're different. Every class has different actions they can take. But to do that, you have to discard one of the 5 cards you're going to play that turn, or you play the card and you get the benefit listed on the card. This is a very common mechanism that's used in a lot of war games, a lot of card-driven war games. It was used in Votes for Women, right? That uses it. Watergate uses it. There are a lot of games that just have this card-driven action selection mechanism. Even Root does to an extent, although it uses very abstracted cards, mostly with just symbols on them. Anyway, it's not uncommon at all. Here, I think they did a good job of giving you a little bit of variety. Every class definitely has very different actions they can take with these cards and the basic actions you can do. But there was enough in the deck. We kind of looked at this at the end of the game. There were like 15 cards that I never touched, that I never saw. And then every turn, maybe 2 or 3 of the cards I discarded to do a basic action, which means I never got that benefit of it. So I think that it's been a well-used mechanism, but I think it was done well here with the variety it provides. For me, the fun of the choices I got to make, and it's not always the case with these types of games. Many of these games, I feel like you're not getting fun choices from them. I definitely did feel like I had fun choices to make with my class using that card. So I think it's worth mentioning that is a core of what this game is. It is a card-based action selection game where you're either playing a card for its action or discarding it for a basic action.
Yeah, I thought the cards were kind of neat too, and they were very thematic. I forget one of them that I had as the middle class. It was something like personal consumption, and you got the opportunity to get some benefit from the government and then use it to buy services in the economy. So it's kind of like an economic stimulus. Maybe that's what it was called, economic stimulus. And that was really cool. I actually really liked that. I also thought it was interesting seeing how the different factions played. Like, for example, my class, the middle class, was both about being consumers. We would buy luxury goods, healthcare, education, and all that to raise our prosperity, which I think was pretty similar to what Adam was doing. But we could also own businesses, but we weren't owning the big capitalist businesses like what Steve had as the capitalist class, where he was creating large volumes of things and wasn't worried about feeding his people. I mean, the capitalists aren't worried about, bringing home, food to feed the family with. But instead of owning a supermarket or a healthcare conglomerate, I might own a doctor's office or a pharmacy or a small organic farm as the middle class. So they kind of fell in the middle, whereas Adams fell more on the side of, basically just providing the workers and getting a paycheck. And then Steve was not worried about earning a paycheck. He was worried about producing a lot of things so he could make a lot of money. And that made for a really interesting dynamic. And again, I'll keep saying this. It's amazing how much it felt like you were experiencing the real give and take of the, class dynamic. I thought I said dynamic already.
Class warfare.
I didn't want to say warfare.
No, great point. You're talking about these different cards and what our factions wanted to do. So we had these basic actions, or sometimes the card would benefit these sort of actions. Chris talked about getting the healthcare. For either one of us could do the same thing. We could go get education. Who are we going to buy that from? Are we going to buy that from the government? Are we going to buy private education from the evil capitalist Steve over there trying to make me pay for school? I can't believe it. So that would benefit our prosperity would go up. When we did the health thing, Chris, I don't know if you noticed, that would cause our population to go up, or at least our population tracker to go up, which would make things more expensive. So I'd have to feed the whole population. So that's how one play of a card, you get to see that whole dynamic echo out this whole game board. And I think that's a triumph.
I wanted to call out, there's kind of two elements, right? This is a very asymmetric game, as we mentioned. And I think there's two elements that stood out to me as we were playing it. And I don't know what the answer is here. One is, could these classes possibly be balanced? I have no idea if they could. And I would never know that after a game or 2 or 3 games. And how many times could you possibly play a long, heavy game like this in a short enough time to actually know whether it's balanced? Do we care? I don't know that we care. And I think there was, to some extent, ways to balance here. Like, there were decisions that everybody could make that would impact the other classes. So if you felt like one was running away with the game, well, I'm not going to buy that from Steve because he's going to get more points for it. I'll buy it from the state this time. So I think there's things about that, but I want to be clear that I have no idea whether I even had a chance to win, or whether Adam even had a chance to win here. We probably did. Who knows? And that's something about asymmetric games that I just don't know that in a game this heavy you could ever know. The second part about, though, is how fun is it to play each of these factions? Did everybody have the same equal experience regardless? And I don't think we did, to be honest. Like, Chris is going to talk about his final thoughts in a bit, and Adam's going to talk about his, and I'm going to talk about mine. And I think the fun came in multiple elements, but I can't tell you that playing my faction, the state, was very fun for me. And I think it was the puzzle that faction provided to me, which was trying to deal with the events that came up, trying to balance the, I forget what it's called, but the reputation or whatever with each of the other factions was fun for me. Trying to move the policy just to hit this every end of round puzzle of what my government policy was going for every time. Those were fun puzzles for me, but I watched what Chris and Adam were doing and they didn't look as fun to me. So I don't know that everybody's going to have the same experience. but I could be wrong. I think that there could be a fun puzzle there. But the other place where the fun comes from, and we'll talk about this in theme a little bit, is that I just found constant fun in the story that was being told and every action that happened here and how they came through thematically. So I'm not sure whether balance and fun is going to be equal for everybody in this game, but I think if you want an interesting experience, then this game has an experience to bring to you.
Yeah, I definitely think I had a different experience with it than you did. Like for you, it really did seem like there was kind of a puzzle that was relatively complex, and it might have been a very interesting puzzle. I hadn't played your faction, so I don't know for sure. But hearing you talk about it, it sounded like you were doing interesting things. For me, I was politically, almost nobody moved any of those political tracks throughout the game. So we just kind of sat in the middle almost the entire time. So I had to do almost nothing until the IMF came in at the end and then sent everything askew without anybody doing anything. And then it was all, all bets were off. But it felt to me, and maybe this is just because none of us really knew how to play the game. And, this wouldn't have worked so well if we had played the game a couple times, that it was just build businesses, keep buying luxury goods and healthcare, and then spending on my people, drive my prosperity up, score a bunch of points, do the same thing next turn, then do the same thing next turn, then do the same thing next turn. And I kept doing that, and I kept getting points. And you guys kept saying, how in the world is Chris getting so many points? Like, I just keep spending stuff. It seemed relatively simple. Although there was that interesting side effect of owning businesses and having to factor in things like paying Adam for his workers. That was a factor too. So again, thematically, I think really, really appropriate. It's just a question of whether you consider it to be fun or not.
Yeah. So where to start with this? I had tons of fun. And the way you just talked about the game right there, Chris, was enjoyable to me as well. Every vocabulary word you used to describe your player board and what you were doing, that made sense what you said. And that's exactly vocabulary words from this game. I want to talk about the IMF mechanism. When we talk about mechanisms, here's another amazingly fun mechanism. The IMF has an opportunity to come in. If too many people have defaulted on all their loans, I don't know exactly how it works. It's IMF. Nobody knows exactly how it works.
No, here's how it works. The state character specifically, if the state gets too many loans that the government policy can support, then the IMF comes in and says, we got to take over. We're going to fix your whole economy here. That's when it happens.
Boom. We just got an economy lesson from playing this board game. That's freaking amazing to me.
Right.
It can come in at the end of the fourth round, or in this case, it came in at the end of the fifth round. What a drastic change that would have. If I don't know how soon you could get it to come on. Would people try to get it to come on like after the second round, after the third round? You can induce the IMF to come and wreak havoc on your little simulation. What a crazy mechanism to have in a board game, to have be so savage in such a tool. I think that's, again, something pretty amazing.
In Hegemony, IMF stands for International Monetary Fund.
All right. Well, again, we could spend days talking about mechanisms here. Let's jump into the theme and production of Hegemony, Lead Your Class to Victory. Now, I've already hinted that I found how thematic all these things tied in to be fun, and I think they worked great. And again, for what a complex economic simulation this was, I think it worked great, and I think it was very approachable for how much was going on here. So I think from a thematic perspective, almost everything was done right. From a production perspective, almost everything was done right. This game was colorful. It was beautifully laid out. The graphic design was understandable. You knew exactly where everything needed to be. I loved playing with these components. I loved looking at this board. I loved the production, and I loved the theme and how it was executed in this game. Bam. Perfect production and theme.
I don't even know what to say about your comment there about production. I mean, it's a pretty plain board. There's not a lot of artwork. I actually found there to be, there was some understandable iconography. Yes, that I will give them that. So I'm not going to talk much about production because I really don't think there's that much to actually talk about.
Wait, Chris, are you looking at a picture of the board right now? I need you to look at this board and tell me that you don't see the way that the colors are presented on the board, the way that each of these businesses have artwork on them. So as the businesses are growing across this board, they all have unique artwork. And this whole thing just comes together into this colorful, beautiful package. Adam, back me up. Don't even let Chris jump in here and say no.
I cannot agree with you more, Tim. This game is freaking beautiful. Look at this thing. The colors are just amazing. The layout is fantastic. the sheer amount and volume of information that's presented in a parsable way is incredible. The production here is freaking perfect.
I think you guys have actually gone insane. No, I mean, the thing that kept running through my mind was like the cards and whatnot, which are really almost the only art other than some iconography, are like terraforming Mars. They're kind of like a picture of a bodega that says Hegemony Market on it. I mean, it's not super exciting. I'm gonna move off of the production though, because
You should.
I'm gonna move away from that because I don't want to get yelled at anymore. And I want to talk about the theme and say that part I agree with you 1,000%. Like I said before, this game is an absolute triumph. I can't believe how effectively they captured an incredibly complex economic model in this game and made it playable. And everything felt 100% thematic. Everything felt 100%. It was story driven. That's hard to imagine in a game like this, that it felt so story driven, but it really did feel like, I mean, I see like, Tim is the tin pot dictator over there handing out stuff to people. And then the IMF comes in and overturns him and sends him off to international prison. I don't know, whatever. But it really did feel like you were watching a political story, and seeing how the stuff played out was incredible. I think this is probably one of the most highly thematic games I have ever played in my life. And I tip my hat to these guys because, man, was that done well.
You guys know how I feel about this already. It's impossible to separate the theme and mechanisms in this game. For me, it is. We keep trying to, describe the mechanisms, in the way that we're describing them is exactly the actions in the game that you're doing. It's fantastic. The way they've translated a board game into education and understanding is just phenomenal. A lesson in civics and economics and so much stuff that I wish I had as a middle schooler or a high schooler growing up. Like if I had played this game, that would have opened my eyes to so many different things in the world that I wasn't aware of. So maybe I'm getting carried away, but maybe this game is pretty freaking fantastic.
No, but what Adam just explained here's the thing, right? So he's right. It feels like an economics lessons and a civics lesson and all these things, except that doesn't sound fun. And I got to tell you guys, I have not laughed as much through these sessions as I did through these sessions. Like I've never laughed as much at a game session. Almost every time someone would take an action, then somebody would make some, joke about the socioeconomic policy. And then oh my God, that's perfect. It was so fun and funny, and just, it all came together here. And like they said, it told a story. It didn't tell it. The game didn't force a story on you. The mechanisms showed you how economics work in the real world. And then you would pull out some like news segment that was like, that just came up last week in the news.
Yes, Tim, you can immediately relate to it. And you're like,
and it could be depending on how the game was going. It could be something that was relevant to our society and current, or it could have been something that happened in the 1960s in Cuba, or it could have been something that's happened in Russia yesterday, right? Like it just depends on how the game is playing out and how the classes are doing, that it tells a different story that's happened everywhere, right? This is a universally, like this story has been told 100 different ways, 100 different times. And every time you play the simulation, you're going to get a different story out of it. And I think that's just amazing. I can't get over how great that experience was for me. Well, let's jump into our final question. And I'm shocked that we're already to this point in the segment. So I'm kudos to you guys for allowing us to move through this quickly. But would you request to play Hegemony Lead Your Class to Victory again? So I'll start here. This is a long game, and we probably spent 7 hours playing it over 3 sessions, which is not ideal, right? Because there was downtime in between. We had to relearn some rules and stuff like that. But I was talking to one of our listeners. We were chatting a little bit, and he asked if we'd played it, and he got a chance. His first session took 8.5 hours to play. It was about an hour-long teach, and about 7.5 hours if you count in a little bit of time off for lunch and bathroom breaks and stuff like that. And I think that's not unrealistic with the first play where there isn't somebody that knows the game well. And even if this game took 7.5 hours to play, I would request to play it again. I don't think it will. I think on a second play where everybody knows it, or on a second play where one person knows it well and can help everybody through it fairly quickly, I think it's a 3.5 to 4 hour game. And I think that's a wonderful way to spend an afternoon. And I'm shocked. I am like, I've talked about Twilight Imperium 4 and how that's like an 8-hour game, and that just sounds miserable to me. And that does sound miserable to me. But this would be a way I'd be happy to spend 4 to 6 to 7 hours hanging out with a few friends in an afternoon playing through this. So yes, I will request to play it again. I do think it's going to be hard. I don't know if I'll ever get a chance to play it again. But if I see it on somebody's shelf and it's a few of us sitting around for an afternoon, I'll be like, can we please play Hegemony again? I'd love to do that.
I find these days that it's harder and harder for me to come up with a really decisive answer on first play, that I want to hedge a little bit and say, well, maybe another play, or yeah, I think this one's really good, but I'm not quite sure yet. This one, clear answer, absolutely not. If asked to play, I would probably decline. And the reason, but here's the thing. I'm really torn in saying that, because there's so much about this game that I respect, and so much about this game that I'm impressed by. And I've already said a bunch of it. I mean, I think this game is an amazingly organized bit of simulation. I think that's incredible. And really what it's going to come down to is, do you find the playing of this game fun? I also agree with Tim with what you said. We were laughing and joking and sitting there, thinking about how this might look in, modern times. I'm making jokes about, Banana Republics and, stuff like that. And all of that was a lot of fun too. But the reality is we sat there for a lot of hours, and while the overall kind of mood was fun because there's a lot of entertaining things and a lot of interesting things happening in the game, I didn't find the step-by-step taking my turns, making these choices. I just didn't find it fun, or at least not fun enough to justify spending that amount of time. I just don't want to do that again. I enjoyed somewhat the play we had. I'm glad I did it. Maybe I'll put it that way. I'm glad that I did it. I'm glad I experienced it, because I think it was an interesting experience, but it's just not one that I need to have again.
Chris, I totally get what you're saying, and I can totally understand that. So when you first gave your answer, and I go, wow, I can't believe the polarization on this game. It's insane. I get that you respect it for what it does, and it's just crazy how much of a no, but I totally get it. And for some people, this game is not going to work. But for me, absolutely 100% yes, I would request to play this game again. If I'm going to be forced to play one asymmetric game, not just player powers, asymmetric game for the rest of my life, it's going to be this one. It's not going to be Root. It's not going to be any of the other ones that we've played. I don't know them all, but of the ones I've played, this is the one I want to get to know well and learn what they all do and all the different powers and all the weird things they can do. That would be Hegemony for me.
Wow.
Yeah, and I get what both of you are saying, Chris. I don't disagree. I do somewhat wonder, would you have had a different experience if you played the class I was playing? But, Adam's class was pretty similar to yours, and he seemed, he really enjoyed that same, very similar experience. But again, that's fine. It's a complex game. It's a unique game, and I wouldn't have expected. I did not expect to enjoy it as much as I did. I will say that. And Adam, I agree with you. Kind of the same state. Like if I'm going to go back to a big asymmetric game where I got to learn everything, and I think this is the one to go to. And I think it's going to be easy to get back into and have fun with in the future.
Yeah.
That will wrap up our conversation on Hegemony, Lead Your Class to Victory. And I can't believe I said that so many times in one episode without mispronouncing it. So kudos to me.
Never one to pat himself on the back.
Let's jump into some games that have been on our table right after this. All right, welcome back. So we're going to talk about a few games that have been on our table this week. The game that's been on my table is actually the last of the 5 games that I said were the top games I wanted to play this year when we did an episode back in January on this topic. And this is Welcome to the Moon. Welcome to the Moon was designed by Alexis Allard and Benoit Turpin, published by Blue Cocker Games. We featured Welcome to in a previous episode, and we've talked about it several times on some episodes. So I was really excited to get into Welcome to the Moon. And, listen, Welcome to is pretty straightforward, right? It's about building a community. It's a flip and write where everybody has a community of 3 piles of cards. All 3 get flipped over every round, and there's a combination of a number and a symbol on it. So you're going to write a number on a house on your street. The symbol gives you some benefit for that turn. And the point is that you have to basically build a street ascending from left to right. You have to use numbers in the right order, and you have some other bonuses for, like, for example, putting a number on a pool when you get the pool symbol up and things like that. So fairly simple game. Welcome to the Moon takes that exact same formula and turns it into a campaign series of missions about exploring space. Now, I've only played the first 2 scenarios, and there's 8 different boards or essentially kind of sheets you can play in this game. And the campaign allows you to kind of take those in a story mode, but you can also just play them individually. You can just say, hey, I'm going to play board 3 today. And it's basically Welcome to with a unique board and some unique mechanisms. The way this is presented in Welcome to the Moon, instead of a pad of paper like you have in Welcome to, where everybody gets a sheet of paper and they're writing on it, it's plays up to 8 players, I believe. And so there are 8 double-sided dry erase boards for each of the 8 different maps you can play here. I don't know what that is, 64 different dry erase boards you've got in this little box. And so everybody's going to say, play episode 1. You're going to all pull side A out of this box, and it's going to be a specific board you're playing on. And then just like Welcome to, you have 3 piles of cards. Each of them are going to have numbers on one side and a symbol on the other side. So I've only played 2 of these. Now, I played episode 1 3 times, and I played episode 2 2 times. So I got a chance to play a couple different scenarios, a couple times each, but I still haven't explored the rest of the game. What this is trying to do is tell you the story of going to the moon. And so the first board is about getting your ship to lift off, essentially. So everybody's got what looks like a rocket ship. And each of it's segmented into floors. So just like Welcome to, where you have streets, this one is you can only put numbers in ascending order on each level of this ship. But this one's done uniquely. Each of the symbols don't actually give you a benefit. Instead, they have to be placed in one of the specific levels of the ship. But there's something else exciting going on here. Every time you fill out a compartment in that ship, you get bonuses that are going to trigger. And the most exciting thing about this, without going into too much more detail, is that there are system faults. In the original game, if you couldn't do anything, you would get a zone violation or whatever, right? So if you get 3 of those, the game ends. In this one, you would get a system fault if that happened. But also, if somebody else managed to trigger this bonus before you did, you would give them a system fault, and they could not trigger that bonus in that segment anymore. So there's more player interaction in this first map, and fun player interaction. In this first map, you're not scoring. The point is that you have to activate enough little rocket ship bonuses in your ship to be able to take off. But if you have any system faults you haven't been able to clear, you can't take off. So it's more of a race to getting your ship to lift off and clear the system faults. Even though it sounds a little bit different, it feels very much the same. It was very fun, very exciting to play through this. And I would say more exciting because it was more interactive. You cared more about what other people had done on their maps, what they were going towards. There are still these 3 goals you're going towards, just like in Welcome to. But another big bonus here is that each of these maps has different goal sets you're going towards. And each of them are very unique and fun. Instead of just, hey, having 2 different segments on your street that are 4 and 5 houses, or 2 and 3 houses, they're all like, be the first one to get 5 water spaces, be the first one to do this, be the first one to have 5 unfilled system faults. So a lot of unique bonuses, but still a way to kind of get a little leg up. If you can race to those bonuses and get to before someone else does, you're going to get a benefit off of it. That was the first map. The second map was a little different in that it looked like a big spiral route through the galaxy. And the goal is that you're trying to send your ship through the galaxy. So at first, it's just one big long line. You could literally, there's probably 30 spaces on it. You could put any number you want to, but you still have to do it in ascending order. But then there are certain bonuses you can get by some of the card symbols that will let you mark off a kind of segment this route. And then you're going to be building the size of the routes over the course of the game. All kinds of other fun things are going on here. Let me just tell you guys, this fires Welcome to 100%. Both of these maps, playing either one of them by itself, I would have picked it over the base game of Welcome to. But you can play either one of them. And then aside from that, and again, I haven't even played the other 6 maps in here, and I'm excited to. I'm really excited to get back to this game. But you could play this as a campaign where there's a little campaign book. And after the first session, you read a segment. Oh, did everyone take off? No? Okay, go to page 52. Did everyone take off? Great. Then choose whether you did this or whether you did this, and go to page 51. So if you want to take a choose your own adventure kind of story route that's going to give you branching paths based on how you did, you're going to go to this other story. And there's new cards you can unlock. There's new bonus goals you can unlock. There's new content you can unlock by going through the story. This game is a wonderful, wonderful addition to the Welcome to family of games. What do you guys say? Are you interested in playing this? Does this sound interesting to you?
You got me pretty interested. I enjoy Welcome to, and this looks like a lot of fun. It looks like it's got a lot of variety. It looks like it's also got some asymmetric powers or like factions. It looks like I'm seeing from the cards there.
Not so far for me, but I think those are some of the things you can unlock in the game. So again, there's content here that I haven't explored, but I get the impression that there may be some of that and other stuff to unlock as well.
Well, Tim, this is amazing. We got to get music in your ears more often. This is the second game tonight that you have raved about. I am looking at this one. It looks beautiful. I'd love to try this one as well, especially after hearing your roaring endorsement. By the way, I'm looking at, I think it's the campaign book or the rule book in there, and that picture looks eerily similar to the cover of Leaving Earth. Have you guys ever looked at that game? I think I talked about it like once or twice.
Mm-hmm. I have looked at it. Yeah, you're right. It does look, I see what you're saying right now. It does look a lot like that.
Yeah, the moon's a different direction, but
that's funny.
Anyway, you talk about pure math, the board game, Chris. Leaving Earth will have you looking at logarithmic tables after you're done playing that one.
Wow. Sign me up.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, anyway, guys, so I would recommend, if you like Welcome to, check this game out. If you've never played Welcome to, skip it and just go to Welcome to the Moon. Pretty approachable, pretty easy to get into. I will say that it's interesting because like Welcome to is a simple game, fairly simple game, and this uses pretty much the same formula. But I'm glad that we didn't try to like go through the campaign and as we got to an episode, like, okay, let's jump in and play that next episode, because the rules are different enough, which I think is good from a variety perspective. But it did take me a good 10, 15 minutes of reading and trying to process what was unique about the rules, which each of these scenarios. For me, I'm glad that we're kind of doing them one by one and just playing them through a couple times, gauging the rules. Once I know the rules throughout the scenario, I think it'll be a blast to play through as a campaign and a story where you're literally getting to just enjoy the story and then jump in and play the game around it.
And Tim, you said these are all dry erase, right? No pads, no running out of pads, having to buy more pads.
Yeah, and you know, so the components seem great, like they're high quality. They give you these little eraser pads that you can use. So the pens seem good, the erasers seem good. I mean, I'm sure they're going to rot out eventually, but they seem decent quality for this type of game. This will be something you could play forever with just replacing the dry erase markers once in a while. Wonderful, wonderful game. Again, Welcome to, goodbye, never want to see you again. Welcome to the Moon. You're my new sweetness.
Ooh, that was so romantic. On my table this week, I have a game that I already teased to you guys a couple of weeks ago when I had just unboxed it, and that was Robot Quest Arena, published by Wise Wizard Games. I finally got a chance to play it, and I've actually played it a few times now, and I played it with my 11-year-old son, and oh my goodness, this game is a hoot. So much fun. So for those who haven't heard of this game or heard me talk about it last time, think anime-looking battle bots with a mechanism through which you're purchasing upgrades, movement, and attack power are all done through a deck-building mechanism, where you start with a base energy for movement, some very base melee attacks, and that's kind of it. And then you move around, you upgrade, you buy new cards, you make yourself stronger, and you're trying to move around this little board, attacking the other robots and knocking them into different obstacles and things like that. This game is so simple and yet so fun. For one, I love deck builders. This one adds in a really cool skirmish aspect to it where you have this board that you're moving around on. The board is a ton of fun. You have this whole stack of little obstacle tokens that you can put on the board, and they all do different things. Like you have one where you push, there's a button you can push on the board with your robots next to it, and that opens up a bottomless pit or a place where flames come out, or you can add a little saw, or there's a gumball machine where if you hit the gumball machine, you get point cubes that come out of it. And so all these little things, and you can have this draft mechanism where you go around the table, each person puts down an obstacle wherever they want it to be, and stuff like that. The art is absolutely delightful. It's anime looking, it's cute, it's quite adorable. And the descriptions are just amusing as you would expect from this kind of a game. They're funny. Like there was one, it was you got your employee ID badge, got you access to certain things, and these little funny cartoon nanobots that would help heal you during the turn if you played the card. as simple as can be in terms of a rule set. As being someone who's pretty familiar with deck building games, I almost didn't even need to read the instruction book. And my son, like I said, is 11. He needed a 5-minute teach, and he was rolling. In fact, he beat me, I think, every game we've played except for one so far. He's like, he crushes me at this game. He's just got this, robot killer instinct. But this is one that I'm absolutely going to be bringing to Portland Con here in a few weeks. And I hope we get a chance to play it, because I think this game is just an absolute blast. You can get through it in 15, 20 minutes for a game at 2 players, might be a little bit longer at 4 players. But it's a delight to look at. It's a super fun game to play, easy to get into. And I think it's one that you guys are going to dig too. And again, you can never overstate the degree to which it's nice to have a game that is both good for a seasoned gamer and good for, a family weight experience as well.
So Chris, I am excited about this one. It looks amazing. The robots look freaking fantastic. I have some questions for you though. Have you played it at different player counts? Any sense of how it would work? You said at 2 players, you're each controlling 2 different robots. Is that right?
Yeah, if you play at 2 players, you each control 2 robots. And I'm assuming the reason for that is because you have to have enough action happening on the board that people are able to hit each other, and you're not just kind of, running, attacking, and then moving away. There has to be more jeopardy. So having more than one robot allows you to do that. 4 players, it would be each person controlling their own robot.
But okay, so Chris, does that mean that you literally, I'm controlling 2 different decks?
No.
Or is it one deck for both robots then?
One deck, both robots. So you draw out your hand of 5 cards, and then you apply those benefits to whichever robots you want.
Okay. Oh, interesting. All right, that's different than I was expecting. So how does a 3-player game work?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at that, but I'm guessing that it's probably each of 3 people.
Okay.
You each control 1 robot.
Chris, I've got a question for you on this, and that is, we're at Portland Con, and this is a 30-minute game. Is this the right size to bring to lunch? And after we place our orders, we can bust this out and play it on a, kind of a smallish size dinner table in 30 minutes and then clear it up and get ready. Or is it like bigger and kind of like more stuff around that wouldn't really work well in that type of situation?
It's small in weight, but it is not small in size. It actually takes up a pretty good sized table. So I don't think we'd be able to do that. And that's part of the fun. I mean, there's these big, a handful of robot, this fully painted minis. That's part of the fun of it. It's big chunky tiles and in a giant board with a trade, not even just a trade row. It's like a whole trade shop with like 12 different piles of cards and stuff. So it does take up a little bit of table space.
This game looks rad. Well, on my table has been a game by strictly Uwe Rosenberg and no one else, with artist by Clemens Franz. And Tim, I don't know if you've talked about this one before or not. I'm talking about Patchwork Doodle.
Okay, I was going to say, I can't believe that Adam's bringing up an Uwe Rosenberg game today, but okay, Patchwork Doodle, that seems right up your alley.
Patchwork always gets a pass. That's the best Uwe. That's the best one out there, man. It's so good. All right, so in our neighborhood, right, there's these little free libraries. People have these set up. Do you guys have these?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Yep. All over the place.
Okay, so one of the neighbors has a little free library, and they put little board games in there, right? How exciting is this? It's like Christmas every day.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I know, it's fantastic. So Sarah and I are going to get in the loop now of maybe putting some of our old card games in there and grabbing one out.
That's great.
And seeing how it goes. But she walked by the other day and saw Patchwork Doodle in there, and she'd heard about that from one of her feeds or something that popped up. You got to buy this, Sarah. So we got it. We got our hands on it. We got a chance to play it. Now, first things first, okay, that art on the front, you're not going to be that good of an artist when you're playing this game. Don't get fooled by the marketing. That they make Tetris pieces look beautiful. And there's some it's amazing, the art that these guys are doing on front of their game. So don't get fooled by that. When you're doing the thing in real life, you're going to have these pale, not as cool. So don't get sad about that. All right, then let's get to the game. If you're familiar with Patchwork, a lot of this is going to be familiar. There's a little guy. He's going to walk around a circle of different shaped patches. The difference in this game is the patch, the shape, the tetramino. So we're filling in grids here. Let me back up a little. We have a 9x9 grid that we're going to try to fill in with these Tetris style shapes, if you're familiar. So Tetris shapes are all 4. These pieces could be as small as 1 and as many little squares I don't know, I think 6 or 7 or 8 in some weird funky pattern. So that's what's all on these cards. Your guy's moving around. You roll this dice, 1, 2, or 3. Your guy lands on one of these cards and you draw it on your mat. You go, go, go. You're going to do that. And that's the same piece for everybody. So it's not like in Patchwork where you're picking different pieces each time. Everybody has the same common piece they have to draw on their grid or not. You can also pass if you're like out of room or something, but be leery of passing like always. You're trying to fill in this grid. After 4 or 5 cards or something of the circle get taken down, then you're going to do a little scoring phase. There's going to be 3 scoring phases as the game goes on. Basically, what you're looking to score for is the biggest square chunk on your board. It's not exactly that, but if you're doing a big square chunk, you're doing well. Do 3 rounds of that. You get a couple of little mulligans or little bonus powers on the side of the board that you can use once per game. And you get one of the other powers is you get to use one of those mulligans again. So 3 mulligans, you get to use one of them twice. All the other ones you get to use once, and that's it. So round it goes. I think the worst part of the game were the pencils that were in the box that came with, I believe they came with the game. It didn't look like imported pencils or anything, but you got from the little free library. So, it might not be the included pencils, but they were pretty, they looked like they worked, but you try to write and nothing comes out. So you got to have your own set of colored pencils or markers or crayons or whatever you want to use for this thing. Other than that, I thought the mechanics were pretty slick. Sarah was like, man, if we ever, go camping, there's a perfect little campfire game. It's tiny. Take it out in a small footprint and you're sketching a little thing, like kind of like Mad Libs or some little doodle games or whatever at the campfire. That's Patchwork Doodle. Had a fun time playing the game.
Chris, didn't you just literally talk about playing this around a campfire?
Literally,
yes.
2 weeks ago? I got this game a few weeks ago, right before going to Maine, and we played several games of this sitting at our picnic table at our campsite. So really, really good choice, Adam. Great game.
Chris, did you ever play the original Patchwork, just the 2-player version?
No, just Patchwork Doodle.
But you have, right, Adam? You've played the original?
Yeah, I still enjoy it tons. I've had it for a while.
How would you say this compares? Like, do you think that it is comparable, or do you think this is less fun, but it's more approachable for a bigger group, or how's your feel on that?
Yeah, this one's going to work well at big groups. And, so again, 5, 6 people, like, I don't know how many Chris had around the campfire. You're not limited to 2. You don't have relatively delicate pieces like you do in Patchwork again. So you can take this thing anywhere, out by the beach, lounging around by the pool. You're not worried about pieces fly away or you lose a pencil or something. I don't know, 2 different situations of games, but still, I think it's a different game. You'll recognize elements from Patchwork, but it's a different enough game. I would call it distinctly different.
All right, cool. Well, I think that will wrap up this episode, except, guys, I've got some exciting news. We had a review on Apple Podcasts this week.
Ooh,
this was on Apple Podcasts in Canada. And so one of our Canadian friends, it's warming up there. People are thawing out, and they're back on. They're talking again. So
go Canada.
Yeah. So we got a review from Stop and Chat on Apple Podcasts in Canada, and the title was "Great Board Game Podcast, 5 stars. The hosts are all fun and thoughtful with their topics. Sometimes their hot takes hurt my heart, LOL, because I'm super into a particular game, but there's lots of nuance to the discussion. Looking forward to listening to more episodes." Stop and Chat, I thank you so much. I'm really sorry that we hurt your heart sometimes. I know that can happen. I would love to hear from you what games it was.
What is the game?
Right.
If you love Hegemony, I'm sorry for Chris's feelings on that tonight. I'm sure this, my guess, this probably had to do with Chris's take on Arkham Horror, the board game, because I know people are really into that. So that's my guess right there. I could be wrong about that. No, but just kidding. Stop and Chat, thank you so much. This was awesome. Thank you for the review. And if any of you other listeners enjoy the show and you haven't rated or reviewed us on your favorite podcast platform, please do if you can there. Apple Podcasts is great because we see the reviews, we can read them. Otherwise, if you want to hang out with us, I mentioned a whole bunch of social media platforms you can find us on. Our Facebook group, Spoutable, Threads, Blue Sky, the platform formerly known as Twitter, all places that you can follow us and get some episode information, as well as just kind of keep up with what we're doing in the board game world. Would love to hang out. Met some awesome people, some of our listeners, and great communities in those places. So keep it coming. Until next week, take care, everybody.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.